Of course, let's continue with the news where Nigeria's inflation rate witnessed a significant spike, reaching 27.33% in October 2023. According to the latest Consumer Price Index, an inflation report released by the National Bureau of Statistics on Wednesday. Analyzing the trajectory, the report emphasized that October's headline inflation rate saw a 0.61 percentage points upswing compared to September 2023. Moreover, on a year-on-year basis, the headline inflation rate soared by 6.24 percentage points compared to October 2022, which stood at 21.09%. The CPI, a metric gauging changes in the price of goods and services, exhibited a notable increase from 26.72% to 27.33%, marking a 0.61 percentage point raise. Now, as Nigerians grapple with the economic repercussions of these developments, there are growing concerns about the impact of the cost of living and the overall well-being of the population. Now, to further discuss this, I am joined by CEO, APT Securities and Funds, Kassimu Garba Kurfi. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now the food price is the basic means of measuring inflation. What other areas would this high inflation impact, and what led to the constant increase to the third time this year?
Well, the other area that highly inflated is transportation. If you remember, the price of diesel have gone beyond 1,000. Most of our food products, we use high trucks and trailer to move them from the rural area to the urban area. And these costs push the price of foodstuff to go much higher. And also the cost of transportation of this item and other logistics have gone high. So invariably, once the food costs push high, it pushes the inflation index to go much higher than expected.
Now, are there specific demographic groups or regions within Nigeria that are expected to be more adversely affected by this surge in inflation?
Yes, two. First, the urban settler. Most of the urban settler, they rely on the food done by the rural settler. So you see that because of the cost of transportation, so the urban inflation is much higher than what you expect in the rural area. The other segment of the country that were affected are the babies. You know, when the cost of the productions go higher, if you go to the baby food, go high. And what is it? That it may not enable the parent to provide the nourished food for the children. And therefore, you start getting the children underfed and or malnourished because of lack of the adequate and provisional adequate food for the children. So these two segments of the economy suffer heavily, urban settler and the babies.
About measures that, of course, we can curb this. What measures, if any, should the government consider to mitigate the impact of rising inflation on vulnerable populations?
Well, I think the federal government and the state need to address transportation. First, you know you have to move children from their houses to the schools. And this costs a lot to the parent in view of the fact that most of the transportation have doubled. So there is a need for the state and the federal government to provide adequate provision of transportation, at least for those children, enable them to attend schools. And also the high institution. If you look at most of the high university, they don't provide up to 30% accommodation of the student. So over 70% of the students are living outside the schools. And there is a need for the federal government and the university to provide adequate student buses so that they will be able to pay less and to be able to attend the school. Having said that, the development that is going in the railway is a welcome development, and we want more of it because most of the cost of the food is due to the transportation. And if we can get railway to move from north to the south, from east to the west, you will see that 50% of the cost of production will be reduced. Because today, you go to the rural area, you see a basket of tomato is less than 500 naira. But by the time you go to the urban time, you see that they are talking of 3 to 6,000 naira, more than 500 times because of the cost of transportation and the logistic. So we think that if the federal government can address this, it will reduce, and therefore once the cost of the food go down, everything will go, especially now that is the harvesting period. If the cost of the food go higher at the harvesting period, what will you say by the time we enter into March, April next year?
Now, most central banks hike interest rates to combat inflation, but this also makes doing business harder. Now, are there no other means for the government to tackle inflation? And of course, if there are, you might just want to enlighten us a bit.
Yes, rising the MPR is also another way of cutting the inflation, because the central bank is trying to attract more depositors. If you don't attract depositors, this money will go to the market and cause more inflation. Because when there is too much money in the hand of the individual, what they do, they buy asset. And by so doing, they are now pushing the cost to go, the price to go high because of too much money. And what we say, demand inflation. So MPR have no choice, CBN have no choice than to raise the MPR. The only alternative for the CBN to provide with other schemes, soft loan, for the manufacturers so that they can assess it at a single digit, just like what they did to the farmers. A lot of the farmers through the agro were able to get loan in the single digit, and that is why they were able to produce more of rice. So the central bank should provide another soft loan to the manufacturers, to the importers of the raw material, to those who can reduce the cost of production so that the unemployment will be reduced to the minimum. Because as much as the cost of the fund go high, it will reduce borrowing from the bank and therefore reduce productivity, at the same time increase inflation and unemployment.
Kassimu, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.